Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to continue talking about IB Business Management, summarizing and analyzing more of these chapters. We're going to get right into it. Today's chapter is 2.1, which is Functions and Evolutions of Human Resource Planning. Now, this chapter is by no means complicated. However, it is very layered and very dense in terms of information content. I have simplified some parts of this. There are a lot of comparisons or, talk in the chapter about advantages and disadvantages I'm not going to include because a lot of them are either common sense or it's just redundant for me to repeat them. But without further ado, I'm going to start. So the first thing that this chapter discusses is the process of the workforce and HR planning. Now, what is HR planning? HR planning is the process of anticipating current and future trends in employment. What workers are you going to need? And this allows for you to reduce your errors and costs in hiring because you're planning ahead. And so these plans tend to include, they include consideration of current and future ability. So what workers do you have? What labor do you have? And what are you going to need in the future? Identifying the gaps. This is an important one. Identifying gaps in your business. So what areas are not filled and who are you going to need to look for? Knowing what the training needs are for these workers once they are acquired, and to develop this training, your recruitment strategies, and other personal policies. So that way, when you get these new workers, you're prepared for it. In this plan, it's also required you have to consider a lot of different aspects. You have to consider labor demands, so your history, your turnover rate, your workload, if the workforce is flexible or not. This is an important thing that comes up in this chapter, is the issue of flexible workforces. Because, for instance, it can cause a shortage of workers because a lot of people will leave and no one will want the new flexible jobs. Most people would like job security, so a flexible job, sometimes it's hard for you to fill those gaps, especially if there's a difficult point in the economy. The other thing is capital intensity. This is how much of investment you're making in the machinery that you're using. If you have a high or low level of fixed assets. So let's say you're a capital intense company. That means you're investing a lot in your machinery or in your various supplies, and you have a high amount of fixed assets. Meanwhile, if you're not capital intensive, it's the other way around. Another thing you can do is work study. So this is to look at your workers. How are they going and things like that. And basically be able to make a comparison of what is their productivity and be able to kind of base your analysis on that of what you're looking for. One of these examples would be a time and motion study, which is basically an analysis of the time spent going through the different motions of a job or a series of jobs, how long that takes. And that way you can kind of base on, all right, well, seeing how long it takes, what workers work the best in these settings, which workers are we going to need in the future, how many workers are we going to need in the future, other things like that. Also efficiency studies, which is another form of that, just seeing how efficiently people work. This, again, helps for you to find the best number of people that can do your work efficiently. Another thing to take into account is derived demand. Again, this is all coming under the workforce HR planning because really, when we're talking about this, we're talking about the overall success of the business because the people that work there are a key part of its success. The success impacts them and they impact the success. So really, how's the business doing? All of its indicators impact how you're going to be recruiting your future workers. So returning to this, what is derived demand? This is to say the demand for a product that is derived entirely or results entirely because of the demand of a different or related good or service. And it is solely gaining this demand because people are trying to use this product or service you provide to get the other product or service. All right, this sounds very complicated, but I'll put an example to make it more straightforward. Think of mobile phones in lithium batteries. Under normal circumstances, I do not want to buy a lithium battery. Lithium batteries have very low commercial demand because there are other types of batteries. However, when it comes to mobile phones, lithium batteries have become essential for the making of these phones. And there is very high demand for mobile phones. As a result, there's now high demand for lithium batteries. Therefore, lithium batteries are benefiting from derived demand. Because there's such a high demand for mobile phones, then they also have demand for the batteries because they are a necessary product to make a phone. So they are benefiting from this. That's an example of derived demand. The demand for your business is coming because someone else is demanding a different product that's related to yours, or maybe not, but that your product helps or is connected to. The demand for that product is raising the demand of your product. Also, the demand for labor depends on the demand for the product. This is what I was saying, that the success of a company, the state of a company, impacts entirely what a business is going to do in terms of hiring workers. So if the company is in good conditions for hiring workers, well, then they're going to be hiring lots of workers. But if there's low demand for their product, so if the business is in bad conditions, there's not going to be demand for labor. Finally, natural wastage. This is basically the aging and retirement of your workers. Their quality is declining and the quantity is declining. As they start aging, their quality will probably decrease, and then eventually they'll retire from the workforce. So knowing that is an important thing to be able to plan your strategy for recruiting workers. So again, this all fits under this strategy or under this category of planning your future of how you're going to be recruiting employees, knowing all this information about the company. Again, I told you this is a thick chapter, but none of these I think are very difficult. Next, we have staff and labor turnover. So that's pretty straightforward. That's just the percentage of workers that are leaving the company. You can calculate this as a very simple ratio. You know, the number of workers you have, the number of workers that have left the company, multiplied by 100. That's the percentage. That's your labor turnover. High labor turnover is bad. It means there's either bad working conditions or bad pay or other circumstances or better jobs that are attracting away all of your workers. Low turnover means you have a good, stable, strong business, and it's a good sign. Now, the next thing this chapter deals with is the reasons for leaving a job. And really, it identifies two clear ones. The first one is clamps. This was seen by this investment guru. I forget what his name was, but it's this acronym for what are the 6 reasons that are acceptable for leaving a business. The first one is challenge, basically that it doesn't challenge you enough. Second's the location, which is that you're not satisfied with the location. Maybe it's in a place that's not very easy to get to, or it's not close to your home and you have a long commute. Advancement, career advancement. If you don't feel like the job is bringing you anywhere, or if you don't think the company's going anywhere. Money, that's pretty obvious. You're not getting paid well. Pride or prestige, if you want more prestige. And job security. If you don't think the job is secure, you can leave. So these are important ones. The final one that it identifies is poor morale, which is among the workers. If they're just not feeling good in the job for whatever the case may be, if there's a bad corporate culture, if there's not proper payments, if there's a toxic environment, if they just don't feel passion for their work, a bunch of reasons for poor morale. That could be another reason for leaving a job. Now, there are a ton of things that impact the plan for a workforce. What are you going to do with your workforce? The first thing is your supply of labor. So, and this itself is impacted by a bunch of things. But what are you going to do with your workforce depends on the labor, and that can be dependent on rent. What's the rent like in the area where your business is operating? What's the rate of employment? Is there a high amount of unemployed people who will be looking for jobs or no? There's a bunch of other factors. Also, demographic changes, age, gender, race. What's the government like? What are government policies? How the company finances? What's the structure of the business? How well do you communicate with your business? What's the morale of the workforce? Are there any leadership changes with the managers, or what are the leadership styles of the managers? And the need of the business and the workers to change and their ability to react to change. These are all very quick ones and very straightforward. I don't think these are really going to be too key because most of these are common sense, but these are just different factors that can impact a workforce that are important to know. Okay, and so then this chapter moves into the recruitment process. So what is the recruitment process? This is also a pretty straight one. And this goes, because the thing is also this chapter, as you're going to start seeing, it's working in chronological order of, what are the different stages? Because now we've just talked about the workforce in general, the recruiting, the recruiting factors of the workforce that you currently have. Now we're getting to recruiting. How are you going to get employees? And then after this, we move on to training and all the other phases that come after. Okay, so now we have recruiting process. So we start with a job analysis. All right, this means you're putting out your qualifications, who are you looking for, and your compensation. Next, your job description, which is the details of the job, how flexible it is. A lot of jobs also put out a person specification, which is basically what's your ideal candidate. If you could, perfectly make someone to take this job, Who would you pick? Then you advertise the job. And as is very common in business management, and this trend is not to be broken by this chapter, there are two types: internal, external. Internal means you're going to advertise within the company. Usually it's for a promotion. You're saying, all right, we have this new job open. Who wants it? But within the job, within the company. And so this has some advantages of it's a bit safer, easier for negotiation. You already know the quality of work in the beginning because this person already works for your company, things like that. The risk, of course, is you're working from a smaller pool, so you might not get the highest quality candidate. You could create drama within the company if you pick this guy over this guy because then someone could get offended. There could be a lot of things. And also, all the employees already know your tricks. External, on the other hand, is, of course, you go out and you say, all right, we're looking for anybody who's going to take this job. And that can have its own benefits of now you get access to the entire pool, but also there can be a lot of drama. There can be problems with finding labor as well because, say, your job's really specific, maybe no one's interested. You have to do a lot more convincing to get someone to pick your company versus if it's internal, the person's already working for you, so it's a lot easier to convince them. There's the need for what are known as traps. This is an acronym. Truthful, relevant, accurate, positive, and short. This is for the job information. When you're giving information to people, it should be all these things: truthful, relevant, accurate, positive, and short. Then you have your application process. So people submit the resumes, cover letters, application forms, etc. Then you have your selection process. You pick the right candidate, you give them a job offer, they sign, and then you have to monitor, which means everything you've done in this application and hiring process, you got to have some paper that's keeping track of what have you done here. If you don't, because sometimes people get in hot water because there's potential corruption in what they did in the hiring process, where there's just suspicions about happened. And of course, you have to document everything for the government and for the public records. So paper trail. All right. Then let's get on to training. So this is when someone's actually in the company. Training is just you're initiating someone in your business. You're saying this is how things work. There are many types of training. One of them is induction. This is before the person even works for you. You bring them in, you give them an introduction, you explain what the business is, you tour them around the facilities, and you show them, you meet the coworkers and all those things. This tends to be common for high up jobs. If you're coming in as a director, they don't just throw you in, cold turkey. They start bringing you in, showing you around to the different people so that you can get a feel of what is this business like, what are things going to be like here, and you're prepared once you actually start working on the job. Then the next type of training is on-the-job training. Now, I have worked in my life in two places. They were both fast food restaurants, and this was their type of training, which is basically I got in there, and they're like, all right, make food. They did not give me any training whatsoever. I had to learn on the go by my experience. Now, fortunately, the jobs are not complicated, but this is kind of a trial by fire type thing. If you just have to get in there and work at it. Now, this means learning from coworkers, learning from your experience, or sometimes you're mentored or you shadow senior managers, but that's not always the case. In my case, it was not. Off the job is the third type of training, which means you're learning from specialists that are third party. So maybe you go to the university or you're required to have a degree, so you have that off the job training. For some jobs, this is required. I mean, obviously, if you want to be a doctor or engineer, you're not going to learn everything on the job. You have to have some kind of training, or you have to get specialized training for that specific kind of job, and you get it from somewhere else. The advantage is that this can give you some, external expert experience. It's a wide range of training. You're not distracted. However, it's also expensive. And while you're doing the training, you're not working for the business. So it is a bit of a loss for them. Next, you have cognitive training, this is really almost going outside of business management because this is just training for you on the theoretical parts of just being more or less stupid. That's a weird way to say more intelligent, but to be less stupid, basically, to be a smarter individual. So you can be smarter working for the company, but you're not actually training in the company specifically. You're not training for anything, company related. You're training to just be smarter. You're training your various mental faculties. And now typically there are kind of different theories on how you can do cognitive training. One way is that people have this idea that there's 30-something different cognitive facilities, and you train each one of them differently. So you train your attention to detail, your divided attention, your whatever, or your ability to do math problems, your ability to physically do things, your ability to write, whatever. And the belief, although in spite of this, is that is incorrect. That the actual truth is that because you can't train these things separately. That's the problem, is that there's some people that believe that you can train them separately, and there's people that you can't, and they think the brain is really just a whole connected system, and you have to train it as a whole together. And this has been, for the most part, supported. Neurosurgeons and neuroscientists say that, generally speaking, the brain works as a whole, and if you're better at one thing, you tend to be better at another thing than someone who just has a lower level of cognition altogether. Final one is behavioral training, which is to improve employee attitudes and behaviors. So this is normally if you're already there, so that they have a better attitude when they're at work. All right, and that moves us into the next part of the section, which is appraisals. So appraisals are an annual review of your job performance, just like the appraisal of, a house. This is an appraisal of an employee. The idea of these is to reflect on a year's performance, praise anything you've done well, and set future goals for the employee. Now, there's a wide form of ways that you can do appraisals. The first one is an essay. I mean, straight up, your employer just writes an essay of, this is how you did this year. The advantage of this is that it's very diverse. It can adapt to each employee, how they're doing. However, it's very qualitative because it's just a description. Another way you can do this is with a rating system, which means you just have certain categories and you say, here are the numbers, and then your recommendations. Problem is, this is very one-dimensional because it's more objective in the sense that it's a number. You can physically see, I'm a 4 and John's a 5, versus on an essay, it's just, John did good and this other guy did very good. And it's like, well, okay. So this is a bit more of an upfront way of putting that out there. But again, it's very one-dimensional because you're just giving them a number. Another way is peer review or peer appraisal, which is basically you pick someone else who's at the same level of your work as you, the same level in the company, and you guys review each other. This is a solid way to do it because that also means it's not like a manager who doesn't understand your job. It's someone else who's doing the same job, so they understand it very well. Problem is, you might not be very willing to criticize a peer, especially if they're going to see the review and they know who did the review. Another way to do it is upwards, which is an employee appraises their seniors. This can be good for getting good feedback as a senior on what you're doing by the people that you're commanding, but also, again, it suffers from the same problem of you might not want to criticize your boss, especially if they know that you're the one who wrote the review. So they might not be entirely honest reviews. Another one is MBO, management by objectives. This is basically an employee at the beginning of the year will set themselves objectives they want to attain that year, and they're measured by how well did you attain those objectives or did you not obtain those objectives. Then you have formative or summative, which is basically there's a specific job process that you have to do. Formative, you're evaluated during this specific job process, so that there'll be a specific job or specific task that you have. Say you're an engineer, a specific project, you're evaluated during that project. Now, if it's summative, that's after the project is finished, but it's based on a specific thing. It's not like an annual thing. It's more specific to that certain task or that specific job process. Next, you have 360-degree, which is basically you take in a much different perspective. You're not evaluated by one person, one superior or one peer. Instead, you're evaluated by your managers, your peers, your subordinates, everybody. This is a very holistic view of things. So the problem is it's also very inconvenient because you have to, just on one employee, you have to get reviews from, 5, 10 different people to get this review versus if it's a normal appraisal, it's just from, one superior. And then finally, self-appraisal, which is employees set their own targets for improvement. Of course, they have to be realistic to a certain measure, and they evaluate themselves on, did I live up to those requirements I put on myself? All right, and then we're going to talk about dismissals and redundancies. This is the act of getting rid of employees. All right, so now we've talked about recruiting your employees, training your employees, having your employees, evaluating your employees. This is when you got to get rid of your employees. So there are two ways. Dismissal, which is firing. This is just pretty basic. You got to have a justified reason, of course, except in some fields where you can fire quite easily, but most places you have to be able to justify it. You just say, all right, sorry, you got to leave. Of course, there's also quitting, so self-dismissal. And then there's redundancy, which is when the company restructures and either the job is eliminated because it just doesn't exist within the new company structure, or the company can no longer pay the employee for whatever the reason may be. In both these cases, it's not a firing, it's just we don't have a job for you anymore. Now that we've kind of gone outside of a single company, let's talk about the more external parts of things, all right? So employment patterns and practices can change with a variety of causes. For instance, the employment sector, how is that changing? Maybe they've gone from primary to secondary, they've acquired new businesses. there are new companies that are available, new suppliers, new whatever, an aging population, or the labor supply. The way that you employ people is going to change a lot based on, who do you have access to, right? What other companies, what suppliers, what retailers, what raw materials or, suppliers do you have access to? What's the age of your population? Is everyone old? And is there a lot of demand for your jobs? Is there low demand for your jobs? The other thing is flexible working hours. Are you offering flexible working hours? Um, are you allowing home working? Are you allowing part-time employment? Do you have flex time, which is where workers have, a certain number of hours that they have to work during a certain period of time, but they can decide their hours within that. That's actually the situation that my dad has in his job, which is he works at home. Each week he should work 40 hours, but he can pick whenever he wants those 40 hours to be. So if one day he wants to work 20 hours and the next day he doesn't want to work at all, that would be insane, but he can do that as long as he works those 40 hours every week. So that's another way that things can be impacted is, do you have those flexible working hours? What do they look like? Those kinds of things. All right, and now we're getting into the final 2 points of today. All right, so we have outsourcing, offshoring, and reshoring. These are all different ways of the company expanding or contracting out of what it already is. All right, so the first one is outsourcing. This is basically just anything of, you say, all right, we have this job, we could do it within the company. And there's insourcing, which is when you find someone in your company to do it, or outsourcing, where you say, all right, this external firm, this other company that's not us, they're going to do it for us. And you go and you give them the job and you pay them and you make your connection with them. This is also connected to offshoring. Offshoring is a form of outsourcing. And it's famous because, you think of offshoring like to India because it's cheaper. Basically you say, all right, we're going to go overseas. So we're outsourcing overseas. Outsourcing is just generally saying any kind of company that's not us is going to do this work. Offshoring is specifically saying, all right, we're going to a new country. We're putting our operations there. We're doing something over there. This is famous as, you go to like India or China or Mexico to put your factory there because it's cheaper, there's lower taxes, and there's fewer labor laws than there are in the country where your company is headquartered, for instance. Then there's reshoring, which is when you bring back offshore or outsourced personnel back to the original location. This can be seen in a few ways. I think a good example is I know someone who works at a university in the United States, and they also have a campus in Qatar. All right, their university. So they have a United States campus and a campus in Qatar. And that campus in Qatar, sometimes employees will be taken back, professors and whatnot will be taken back to the US because they see how quality they are in the Qatar university, which is kind of like an extra branch. They say, all right, you're great. We want you on our main campus. We want you doing research. We want you, meeting with, networking more within our main area versus in this other location that we have in Qatar. So that's an example of reshoring. We're kind of taking people back. That would also be like if you had sent someone to Qatar from the main university and then say, all right, we want you back because we need you for whatever the reason is. All right, and then the final point is innovation, cultural differences, and ethical considerations. So innovation, you want to have a culture of innovation, you want to train, and you want to recruit, and you want to develop for innovation, and you want to have a good human resource management so that people they're motivated to innovate within the company. We also get here a key term within business, which is a shamrock organization. This is basically a company where you imagine a shamrock, right? The clover with 3 leaves on it. And you have the central clover, which is the essential executives and workers and permanent people. So this is your core, it's the center leaf. On this side over here, you have part-time help, your flexible workers. And on this side, you have your outsourced workers. All right. So it's a shamrock organization. You have really the center core, and then you have your part-time and your outside contractors that are not as fundamental parts, but they're both supporting this central core to create this holistic operation. Then you have cultural differences, which you got to know how to manage them. You got to have awareness of them, maybe even training so that people are aware of the different cultures and the diversity within their own business. And finally, ethical considerations. This means respecting anti-discrimination laws, paying people equally, don't pay your women 75 cents on the dollar for each man, and health and safety at work. This could also help your business benefits by lower absenteeism, a better image, and fewer corporate claims against the company because you're going to have a better image as a company because you treat your workers right. Anyway, that is it for this chapter, guys. This was a thick one. I just realized this is 25 minutes long and not very dry. I'm sorry I couldn't use flowery examples. I was really just going through the notes, just knocking everything down as fast as I could. But this is just a really high content chapter. It's a really big chapter. It's really thick. But we got there. It's just important that you know this stuff, that you really have it internalized, and then you can build from it. Because that's the thing, is business management builds on the basic principles we're seeing right now, and then you get to the complicated stuff, chapter 4 and chapter 5. And that's when you need to have this understanding, because you're just going to see a word like Shamrock Organization, or you're going to see them talking about outsourcing and offshoring. And you just got to know that's what this is. But knowing that, I think I've explained everything as comprehensively as possible. Hope you guys have all understood. If you have any questions, of course, you can always ask in the comments. Playlist down below with all of the videos from this series I have talking about business management, so you guys can go ahead and check out the rest of those videos if you have any confusion or want to see summaries of any other chapters. I'm going to continue going, resuming every chapter from business management, high and standard levels. So we're going to get all the way to the end, because this is studying for me the same as it is studying for you. So wishing you guys all the best of luck. Thank you for watching, and have a fantastic rest of your day.